world is full of complex problems like, rough sleepers in our streets, or climate change, or raising smallholder farmer incomes, or making our organisations truly diverse. And these are the sort of problems that can feel intractable and stuck. And like, despite our best efforts, we aren't able to make the change at the pace and the scale that we want. Now, that's because these problems are actually outcomes. They're outcomes of a bigger network of relationships and incentives and drivers and policy and past practices and beliefs. And it's that system that sits underneath these sort of complex problems and produces them. It's that system that we need to work on if we want to tackle these sort of complex problems. Now, for those of you that like a metaphor, imagine you came around my garden. I'm endlessly trying to produce a healthy, flourishing garden. And if I'm trying to do that, I can work on each plant one by one. I can pull out the rotten tomatoes and I can plant new things. But if I want to create a healthy and thriving garden, I don't work on the individual plants. I work on the conditions. I work on the water and the sunlight and the soil quality. Maybe I need to prune back a big tree that's blocking the light from other things that want to grow up. So what I do is I work on the enabling conditions rather than the individual plants. And that's what we mean by working on the conditions rather than the actual problem. And system thinkers do, when they get less abstract sometimes, they do talk about this idea when you try and work at a complex problem directly without considering the underlying system. It's like shouting at a rotten tomato and hoping it just gets better. It'll keep you busy, it'll give you plenty to do, but it won't actually make much change. So that's what we mean when we talk about working with complex problems working to change the underlying enabling conditions in order to tackle complex problems. So Systemcraft, the framework has sort of two bundles of stuff that it asks us to do, and these interrelate with each other. And the first thing we need to do is we need to understand the landscape of the complex problem. We need to understand what's going on beneath the surface. And complex problems have 4 characteristics, right, that are always present. First, they have no single owner. So no one person, however brilliant, however well-resourced, can make change on their own. The collective action is the only sort of action that will tackle a complex problem. Second, complex problems have multiple root causes. There's no one thing that if you change would end rough sleeping, for example. And for this reason, they're immune to silver bullet solutions. You have to have multiple things going on at the same time to create shift and change. Thirdly, complex problems are actually dynamic. They're changing, they're constantly evolving. And that means that when we work with those sort of problems, we have to work with them in a dynamic way. We have to constantly be updating our understanding of what's the problem like now, how's it shifted? And there's constantly windows of opportunity are opening and closing, and the possibilities for change are moving all the time. So again, we have to be able to work with them in dynamic ways. And fourth, complex problems are produced by a system that is working. For some people, somewhere, it's producing some benefits. And for this reason, complex problems resist change. There is a resistance to change because it is working. Right? Now, when we say things like the system is broken, what we actually do is we become blind to the power in the system. We lose sight of it. Right? So when we ask ourselves, who and how is this system working? What benefits is the status quo delivering? That often reveals where the power is in the status quo. So Systemcraft says, right, the first thing we have to do is we have to understand the complex problem. We have to get underneath the surface of it. We have to understand what's really going on here. And in order to do that, we're going to need multiple perspectives. And we're going to need perspectives from different parts of the system. And then we have to see that landscape as something we update as we work with the system and learn more about it. So it's not a sort of static product. It's something we update. But then the second bundle of stuff in Systemcraft say, okay, so what do? How do I work on these enabling conditions? What does it mean to work on the soil and the air and the water? Well, with Systemcraft, we've identified 5 things, 5 enabling conditions that you can work on. And I'm just going to run through them at a headline level, but these are what we'll unpack in more detail as we go through the issue that Ian's been working on. So these 5 are all equally important, like the soil, the air, the water. There's not They're not linear. They don't happen first. There's no order to them. And in your problem, in things you're working on, one may be more salient or more possible for you to work on. But I'll just run through them as a list. So complex, these sort of complex problems, these systems, these collective action is the only form of action. So action that organizes for collaboration, that wires together different stakeholders, allows them to communicate with each other, enables them to work together, is action that shifts the system. It shifts the conditions. The second thing on here is what we call set the direction. And systems ask us to do two things at the same time, working on system change. They ask us to hold very big ambitions, like a truly diverse organization. And then we have to work on concrete things in the here and now, things that we can suck resources into, things that have a degree of tempo and time to them. And you need both, right? So set the direction is about creating those discrete bits that we're going to work on now. Make it matter. Change is about moving from a current state to a future state, something we want more than the current state. And there's often, a value of sacrifice to go through for that, or change can be hard and it often involves loss. So to make it worth it, it has to matter. We have to want that future. But most importantly, it has to matter to the people that are going to need to do the changing. Okay, so stories that make it matter, make change matter for the people that are going to need to do the changing as part of working on the enabling conditions for change. Next up, it's incentives, and we have to work to change incentives. So remember, the current state exists because it is working and because we're all making coherent decisions that make sense in the moment. So if we want to make systemic change, we have to change what makes sense, and we have to work on the incentives driving the current state. And that's both the formal and informal incentives. And finally, we just talk about harnessing collective intelligence. So systems that work for the few and not the many often have really big asymmetries of information in them. And that is that some people, some stakeholders are able to be both producers of knowledge about the system, so their voices dominate, but also are more able to be consumers of knowledge about that system. So they have a power advantage. So action that redresses those asymmetries, action that allows more people to be both producers and consumers of information about a system, is action that shifts systems. So that's the 5 dimensions of Systemcraft.